Resilience is the essence of being human. So just by virtue of being born into a human body, we have been blessed with a certain amount of resilience. Now, how do I know that? Because Greg, you're here, I'm here, our listeners are here, and we have all survived every disappointment, rejection, loss, health diagnosis, disappointing turn of events, and yet we're still here. This idea from starting from a place where resilience exists within us, as opposed to thinking about it as something outside of us that we have to go out and find.
Dr. Taryn Marie Stejskal, welcome to the show. Today's going to be an amazing episode. And for the audience, we have got a resilience expert today, and it is a massive topic. Everyone's talking about resilience. No one really knows what it is. People try to figure out sort of how do we get there. But today we're going to be chatting about the 5 practices of resilience, which is in your book. Taryn, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I'm so delighted to be here with you.
Well, it's amazing having a fellow leadership expert and coach and someone that comes from the industry. We were just chatting before the show with a little bit of your history where you spent a lot of time corporately in companies like Nike when it came down to executive development, succession planning, coaching. You've done a ton of research on this topic. This is where your book kicks in. And I think the audience is eager to jump into this or eager to hear this. So coincidentally, I was chatting with my community membership group earlier, and people were going through some of the trials and tribulations that they were sharing, and the topic of resilience came up. Right? And someone asked me, they said, "So, what is resilience? How do I actually develop resilience?" And I don't know if with like most of these things, there's a one size fits all, but there are certain practices that we can put in that help promote and allow us to become resilient. And well, I guess maybe my first question to you is resilience an outcome of things, or is resilience a skill that we develop? How do we define that? Where does it fit in to the equation?
That's such a great question for us to kick off with. I love that. It's very foundational. And I would say it's both and, right? So let's start with the and part. The and part is resilience is the essence of being human. So just by virtue of being born into a human body, we have been blessed with a certain amount of resilience. Now, how do I know that, right? Because Greg, you're here, I'm here, our listeners are here, and we have all survived every disappointment, rejection, loss, health diagnosis, right? Disappointing turn of events, and yet we're still here. Right. And this idea from starting from a place where resilience exists within us, as opposed to thinking about it as something outside of us that we have to go out and find, is a really important, I think, departure and differentiator of my work. And also something that allows resilience to speak to a greater degree to all of us, because then it's not about like, oof, am I resilient? Am I not resilient? Am I not resilient enough? Right there, it kind of becomes this like dread spiral around resilience where we're like, well, that sounds like a great idea, but I really don't want to uncover, right, that maybe I'm lacking in this area. So when we talk about resilience as being the essence of being human, not only do we get kind of around that dread spiral, we begin to recognize, as we do in the spirit of executive coaching and in the spirit of being a holistic individual, that in fact, this is already something that exists within us by virtue of being human. And then, to your point, it's a skill that we can continue to develop and enhance over time, just as we would increase our cardiovascular ability, right? Or our muscle tone, right? And by going through the inevitable experiences of challenge, change, and complexity, resilience also becomes, or enhanced resilience, I should say, becomes a result, to your point, of going through those experiences. It's great when things are going well. The sunny days are beautiful. And we learn so much more about ourselves, who we are, our strengths and talents in that, in those kind of rainstorm moments of life where things aren't necessarily going right.
Right, right. I love what you were describing there, that resilience is actually part of who we already are, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I got this visual, this visual of I got to access it within inside of me instead of trying to go in and attain it, right? So I think that's a really great place to launch with, which is, you know, in a lot of cases, we as human beings are equipped with the tools, the interpersonal skills, which will help us, and it's not so far for us to reach it. So let's go into your 5 practices, because I love this whole concept, right? And I love the concept of yoga. Like, you don't never learn yoga, you practice yoga. You never, learn emotional intelligence, you practice emotional intelligence. You never learn breath work, you practice breath work. And that's kind of the same thing that you talk about with resilience here. So walk us through, what are the 5 practices from beginning to end? Where can we, and where do we start?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So the 5 practices of highly resilient people, which is also the title of my book that launches on April 18th, is based on 20 years of research, interviewing hundreds of people, collecting thousands of pieces of data, and asking people about a time when they had experienced challenge in their own lives, and how did they imagine that they had effectively faced that challenge, right? Even if we didn't overcome the challenge, even if we didn't feel victorious in that moment of challenge, right? Which is, so often the case, right? But feeling effective in that moment. What did we do to sort of show up in the best that we could? And what was it that they felt like they did that allowed them to effectively address that challenge? And as a result of, that sort of aggregate of incredible conversations with amazing people who, taught me about resilience, what has emerged from that today are the 5 practices of highly resilient people, or the 5 things that I heard people say that engendered resilience in that moment of challenge that ultimately led to creating more positive and productive outcome, right? So that's where this comes from. So the first practice of highly resilient people is vulnerability.
Right. Right. People probably wouldn't think that, right? They wouldn't start with that, but it's so powerful. Talk us through vulnerability.
Yeah. So for many of us, and myself included initially, vulnerability, I thought, was sort of the opposite of being resilient, right? So many people say, like, isn't resilience about being strong and tough and Teflon and unchanged by our experience? Turns out it isn't, right? So if there's, kind of a word that's maybe misunderstood, like, I think resilience is categorically misunderstood. So we think about the definition of resilience as being the ability to face these inevitable moments of challenge, change, and complexity, and ultimately, over time, emerge from that experience enhanced, right, rather than diminished. And then when I think about sort of the definition of the first practice of highly resilient people, which is vulnerability, the definition of vulnerability is about allowing our inside self, our thoughts, feelings, and experience, to as closely as possible match the outside self that we are sharing with the world, right? And so in psychology, we would call this congruence, right? The extent to which, our selves are aligned. And so here we get to sort of debunk, right, this sort of myth around vulnerability is self-deprecating, right? Vulnerability is putting myself down. Vulnerability is sharing, right, everything with everyone, too much information, right? This sort of idea. So it's about aligning, right, our inside self, thoughts, feelings, and experience, with the outside self that we share with the world. Now, why would that be important relative to resilience when we face challenge? Great question, right? It's important for at least 2 reasons. One, when we're going through challenge, we really need all of our cognitive, emotional, and physical resources, right? So if we've got one version of ourselves on the inside, and then we're sharing with the world another version of ourselves that's really different or distinct from that, then what we're essentially doing is running 2 different human operating systems, right? And so now we're burning our energetic capital twice as fast in a moment when we need that energetic capital the most, because we're in this moment of challenge. So one is to conserve energy, right? The second is, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we're going to get more help, more support, more information, more resources, because people know what's going on, with us, rather than just thinking we need to stay quiet about it and sort of soldier on, right, on our own. And so this is why vulnerability is incredibly important in these moments of challenge, right? Because we're able to conserve energy to the greatest extent possible, and then reach out to really the trusted advisors, the people in our lives that are going to be able to show up for us and help us move through this, this moment of challenge.
Yeah. Why do you think people have such a difficult time? And I say in today's age, asking for help. It's one of the biggest things I see in the work that I do, which is this resistance to asking for help. There's almost this expectation of, or maybe there's a perception, even better way to describe it, of if I ask for help, I'm weak. What do you think is contributing to people having a resistance and asking for help?
Yeah, I would even say, Greg, I don't even think it's this day and age. I think this is an age-old human story, right? And one of the things that has emerged for me, because I asked myself a similar question, which is, okay, so vulnerability emerges as this foundational practice for how we amplify our resilience. And we know from other great thought leaders like Brené Brown that vulnerability also emerged in her work around living a wholehearted life, right, as she defines it. So then the question for me is like, okay, if we know vulnerability is good for us, why aren't we all running around living our most fabulous, vulnerable life, right? Like when I'm doing keynotes, I'll often ask people, who here is living their most fabulous, vulnerable life? Not a hand goes up in the audience. Right. And what I uncovered is this thing called the vulnerability bias. And what it appears to be is sort of a hardwired cognition, or kind of way that our brain is sort of evolutionarily wired, where we think that asking for help is weakness. And we think that if we ask for help, we're really going to show people who we really are, right? We're going to allow ourselves to be seen to a greater degree. And that's scary. And the vulnerability bias says, hey, if you share with people what you're going through or what you have gone through, something's going to happen and you're not going to like it, right? And I call it the 3 L's. And what the vulnerability bias tells us is kind of faulty voice in our head is it says the 3 L's are people won't like us, they won't love us, and they might leave, right? And that threat of rejection and abandonment in that way is such a powerful prohibition that we think if I ask for help, I'm demonstrating a sense of vulnerability because I'm essentially saying I can't do this on my own. And if people see this, maybe they won't like me, maybe they won't love me, and maybe they might, right? And so the way that we get to move beyond the vulnerability bias and actually ask for help, right, is twofold, right? One, to normalize the experience that we were never meant to do everything on our own, right? That we're meant to live in community, we're meant to live collectively. And 2, we get to think about what it feels like when someone asks us for help, what it feels like when someone comes to us and says, hey, I know that you know a lot about, web design. I'd love help with my website. I've received this diagnosis. I know that you went through this, or someone in your family went through it. Could you help me think about how I'm going to navigate this moment in my life? And what it feels like to know that like someone thinks that we've got something to contribute, and the value and the appreciation that comes with that. And so when we're not asking for help, we're also depriving other people in our lives of having that tremendously valuable experience.
Right. So powerful and so true what you just said there, which is, people being rejected and not being significant and abandoned, if we ask for help. It's one of the most powerful things people can do. And I love the way you also sort of took that to a place of what you do for another person, right? The person that's able to help you. I'm thinking about a friend right now. I got a friend who's going through a challenge in a marriage, and I was chatting with, I'm friends with both of them, and I was chatting with her, and she was just sharing like, he just won't ask for help. He won't ask for help. And I'm like, this is a dude that like, if I needed help in business or just in life, he would be one of the guys I'd call, and I would bank on the fact of him helping and supporting. And it's sad and it's frustrating. And I keep calling, like I'm just staying the course with him because, hopefully he'll pick up and he'll receive it one day. But you can see there's a very difficult time in asking for help because he does have an inability or a concern about being vulnerable, and there's a perception of like he's going to be weak and not liked and not loved and not accepted. Super cool.
Yeah.
For the audience out there, again, this is an important moment, which is sometimes what we got to do is we got to practice these things in order to get good at it. And if we can do this, hopefully what we're going to start to demonstrate and role model to other people is for them to do it as well. I believe the greatest way to teach people is to role model the behavior we want to see, right? I think also knowing the work that you do from a neurological standpoint, when you've been running that neurological pathway for so long, it becomes a neurological highway. And we know those things don't break down, right? So developing these new connections and new branches and new avenues is very possible. That's what's cool about neuroscience, right? Which is a lot of the work you do as well, which is the brain can always keep learning and developing and rerouting and reconnecting. All right, yeah. Super into this. Vulnerability, number one, and I can appreciate why you started. All right, what's the second practice? What's the next thing we can start to work on?
Yeah, I'm going to get to number two. And Greg, I just feel called to say one more thing about asking for help. Because to your point, I think this is so important right now for people, honestly. We spent a lot of time in the pandemic thinking that things were going to get better, go back to normal. And they haven't. And I think in the viewpoint of a lot of people living on the planet right now, not only have they not sort of gone back to
normality,
a stable place of expectation, I think a lot of people feel like things have gotten worse, right? Mm-hmm. And people are feeling a greater sense of fear and concern, and the tools and resources that we once had, I think don't feel like they're actually sufficient, right? Mm-hmm. In this moment. And so I had this vision at one time where for a period of time, I was an open water swimmer, right? And I had this vision that I was in the middle of this lake doing this open water swim. And then I just sort of was there in the water, and I could see the race officials, and I could see all the people that volunteered their time to kayak and watch the swimmers. And I could, see the people on the dock, counting, the swimmers and the numbers, and all the people that it takes to create any kind of sporting event, let alone an open water swimming event. And what came to me in that moment, was really an insight around asking for help. And what I understood was in the moments in my life where I need to ask for help, right? If I'm out there in the water and I'm in trouble and I don't raise my hand, it is my own fault that I drowned, because there are people who are volunteering their time to be there, right? And that for me is a metaphor of life, right? Like if we're out there in the middle of something and we feel like we're going to go under, we've got to raise our hand, because there are people who want to show up for us and whose purpose in life, in part is to help other people. Right. And it's so sad to me, I think, when people are in a tough place, or even as a really extreme example, when people commit suicide or attempt to take their own life, and everybody around them says, I had no idea. Mm-hmm. I had no idea. We'd all rather have a conversation with our dearest friends about how their marriage is falling apart. We'd all rather have a conversation about feeling overwhelmed or afraid or mental health than, attend our friend's funeral or to see a beautiful partnership come apart and not have had the opportunity to offer our support and to be on that journey.
Right. I'll just add to it, which is, or what you were saying, and just in case this wasn't clear either, it's never too late. Back to your analogy, if you're starting to go down, your head's underwater, you can still extend that hand above the water. Like your hand will still go. You might be underwater, right? Yeah. But it's never too late to ask for help. And, on the topic of suicide, which I've been talking a lot about recently, it's sad because, as you said, 90% of the family or friends afterwards said things like, I had no idea, right? They seem so organized, or I wish I knew, or I wish I said something, or I wish I made that phone call. And, you know, back to vulnerability and back to helping, one of the things I've been practicing lately is calling a friend every day. So in fact, I got a purple book here, I'll show you. Every day I write down someone. Who did I call today? Right. And it's friends and it's business relationships and it's people from my life. And, you know, life goes fast. And if you're not careful, you run and you miss things. And taking the time to check in is an important practice that I've been doing lately. And it's just part of how I help or want to help. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah. I think people are afraid of being a burden. And
right.
You know what's a bigger burden? Spending the rest of our lives wondering what if. That's a bigger burden.
Yeah. Regret.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. On to the second practice.
Let's go to the second practice. Let's get more positive. Okay. So number 2 is.
Yeah. So the second practice of highly resilient people is productive perseverance, right? And what this is the intelligent pursuit of a goal. So, you know, you, Greg, and many of our listeners may know about this concept of grit, right? That was developed by Angela Duckworth, where she talks about, you know, the way to achieve our goals, right, is just like being gritty. You know, ironically, you know, here in Philadelphia, right, our mascot for our ice hockey team his name is Gritty. It really aligns, I think, with a lot of the ethos, right, of here in kind of the Philadelphia area. And so I think grit works really well in environments that are not susceptible to significant change or disruption, right? What do I mean by that? If you want to win the National Spelling Bee, if you want to become a Navy SEAL, if you want to graduate from the Naval Academy, if you want to become an FBI agent, if you want to work on Wall Street, right? There's sort of a series of tests and kind of checks and balances, if you will, along the way. And it's really difficult, right? But the path is really, you know, kind of laid out for you, right? And so I think that's when grittiness really works. And there's a lot of times when grittiness does not work, right? Kodak and Blockbuster, right? Like they were super gritty. You know, they were all about staying on that course. But what they failed to do is they failed to kind of pick up their heads and look around and see that the market and the landscape and the product market fit was changing, right? And then to be able to align to where things, you know, were going, right? The Wayne Gretzky of, you know, not where the puck is, but skate to where the puck is going. And so productive perseverance is about, on the one hand, right, like what is sort of the grittiness to maintain the mission, right, despite challenge. And then it's the art and the science of also knowing when, in the face of diminishing returns, we get to or need to pivot in a new direction to capitalize on the opportunity or the disruption, right, that we see kind of happening in our lives, right, or inside of the marketplace. And so it's this very much like sort of awareness, right, that our environment is constantly shifting and changing. And we are checking in with ourselves and the level of challenge and what we're trying to achieve to engage in this intelligent pursuit of a goal, engage in productive perseverance. And also, I think to remove, you know, some of the, you know, maybe shame associated with moving in a new direction, or even wholesale quitting something when we know it's not working, right? We ourselves, or we've seen others, you know, sort of persist too long, right, toward a goal that isn't going to come to fruition. So resilience is also about not just staying the course, you know, and not just pivoting, but the intelligent pursuit of what that goal looks like.
Love that. I talk a lot about objectives and the importance of being able to change your objective in light of new information, right? Yes, there's the pursuit of going after what you want, but we have to be willing to change and receive that new information. And, you know, you're also talking about, like, you know, with practice number 2, it has a lot to do with practice number 1, vulnerability. Being willing to recognize that, oh, you know what, maybe this isn't the right path anymore. Maybe I should change, right? Love the fact that you talk about intelligent goals and productive perseverance. And, you know, I could see how these start to fit. They really need to overlap with each other, these practices. Not just you do step 1 and that's maybe why you don't call them steps, right? They're practices. which is it is this practice and this exercise that will allow me to live to this next practice. Okay, vulnerability number one, super important. Productive perseverance, also really, really important. Love the fact that you define the difference between what is grit and tenacity. And what I also heard you say there is it's okay to not just drive this intense. And if you listen to social media out there, you got people like Gary Vee and hustle, and grind. And, yeah, there's an element to that, but people miss some of the most important pieces to that, which is being able to change and adjust some of those goals. I also talk a lot about go after small goals, right? Do a bunch of little small goals because that'll eventually build up some momentum for us to achieve the bigger goal. All right. What is practice number 3?
Practice number 3 is connection. And when I say connection, I think what we oftentimes think about is the connection that we have with other people. And true to for the other 2 practices that we talked about, where vulnerability is kind of this navigation, right, of both, openness to new experience and sharing ourselves and sort of how we navigate that with like this juxtaposition or this perception of what strength and weakness are, right? Productive perseverance, right, is the sort of navigating of, pursuit versus pivot, right? And then connection is navigating first and foremost the connection that we have with ourselves, right? Trusting our intuition, knowing our worth and value, getting to a place where we believe that we're enough, a sense of self-confidence. And then from that place of a deep connection with ourselves, how we then navigate the external connections that we have in the world with our friends, our partners, our families, our work colleagues. And I think what happens for a lot of people is oftentimes we sort of fast forward past the internal connection, right? And just think about the external connections. And it's really about navigating the sort of intersectionality of the connection that we have with ourselves, and then how that connection with ourselves, what we want, who we're becoming, what we desire, then emerges in practice with our external connection.
It's amazing. This is probably the best description and overview and lesson when it comes down to resilience, right? I think for the first time for the first time for me, I'm hearing a conversation around what resilience is and what do we need to do to actually build it. And it's an amazing blueprint so far. All right, walk us through practice number 4 and practice number 5.
Yeah. Practice number 4 is gratiosity, which is likely going to be a new word for you because I developed this word in response to what I was hearing from the people that I was interviewing. And so it's kind of a 2-part hybrid word, right? So the first part, grati, is about gratitude. It's about being able to look on our experiences, our challenges, our changes, our complexities. And even if we wouldn't have chosen that experience, to be grateful for the circumstance after some time, right? To be able to look on that and to say, okay, I can see the good in that. I can see, even though I wouldn't have chosen that, what emerged as a result that was of benefit or of service, right, to me. And then the osity part is generosity, right? And being willing to share our resilience stories generously with others. And what happens when we share our resilience stories generously, we're again kind of tapping into that foundational element of vulnerability by sharing our resilience stories. And what happens is when we share our resilience stories generously, first of all, we solidify our own resilience, right? We're talking about our strengths and our talents and our skills that we uncovered in this moment of challenge and sort of solidifying for ourselves the fabric of who we are as humans. And then we're also, in sharing our resilience stories generously, we're providing a roadmap for others to understand how to follow in our footsteps, right? Our stories become part of someone else's survival guide. Our stories shine the light on the paths of people who are going through a similar experience and are coming up behind us. And in the corporate world, sharing these stories means that we are able to draw on our own experience to kind of tap into these inspirational moments. And then rather than giving advice, through our experience, right, we're coaching, we're mentoring, we're talking about the big failures and the big opportunities and the big challenges at town halls, and normalizing these types of conversations inside of our relationships and inside of corporations.
Yeah, cool. People think and feel through stories. Greatest way to learn, right? Greatest way to teach is stories, right? Specifically when you're sharing your stories, right? And those trials and tribulations. And yeah, I was recording some posts earlier, and back to vulnerability. The question was, what are some of the mistakes leaders make? And I'm like, we roundabouted vulnerability, but it got into the fact of leaders. One of the mistakes they make is not surrounding themselves with better players, right? Because they have this sort of ego that they have to be the end all and be all, and a great skill set or position for a leader to take is to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I am not the smartest person in the room, and I'm surrounding myself with better people, and I'm learning from these people and contributing to that. All right, the final practice number 5.
Yeah, and I'll just underscore what you shared there, because one of the things that I talk about in my book is this idea that we become the average, right, of the people that we spend the most time with, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that's the 5 people or the 10 people, we are the average of the people that we spend the most time with. So if you're the smartest person in the room, if I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just a big fish in a small pond. I don't think I've ever been the smartest person in the room, so I'm grateful for that. That's not happened yet. Hopefully, it never does, right? And if we don't have people that are ahead of us spiritually, consciously, from a place of intelligence and experience, we're simply not growing. And to be the best, right, in the room, it comes at a price, because it means that we're not going to continue to grow. And in fact, our average is going to come down. Yeah.
Yeah, love the way you described that. Absolutely. And it's okay to be the smartest in the room sometimes, but not in every single room, right? You got to be
not in every single room.
Always got to level up and that pursuit of growing. I think growth is a huge piece of this. And I think, the outcome of resilience, and maybe you'll agree with this, which is when we become resilient, when we develop with that resilience, when we've practiced all these things, which have allowed us to be more resilient, we're more open to grow as well, right? And that's maybe the pinnacle to life, which is, are we growing, right? If we're growing, we're learning, we're experiencing, and just getting better and better. And I've always said this, and my father used to say this actually. He said, there's no refund on yesterday, right? You can't get a refund on yesterday, but you could choose to do something different today, right? You can learn from yesterday. You can take a different choice today. You can move into a different decision today. And we got to stop regretting the decisions of yesterday and start to recognize that today is a day for us to maybe do something different. And that's kind of where the Better Human brand came in, right? Which is, yesterday I effed up, but today or tomorrow I'm going to do it better. Right? I'm going to make better decisions, or I'm going to make better choices, or I'm going to have better relationships and better communication, et cetera, et cetera. Very cool.
And I'll just add to that, like, maybe we didn't know, I think we're so hard on ourselves for stuff. My team used to come to me and they would say, we made a mistake. Right. And I would say, well, hold on. Right. Like, has this happened before? Well, no, it hasn't happened before. Okay, then the moment that we're in right now is a moment of learning, not a moment of making a mistake, right? If we don't learn from this moment and we do it again, then we made a mistake. But the first time is a moment of learning. And I think oftentimes one of the barriers that stands between us and really recognizing our resilience and being able to share our resilient stories is this expectation that we're never going to do anything wrong. And if we do something wrong, it's like a catastrophic failure or mistake. Yet, you've never launched this new product before. You've never had, you've never led a team before. You've never, been at the helm or creating something that's emerging, that's new in your life. And then we're so hard on ourselves. It's our first rodeo, and we're expected to know it like it's our 734th rodeo,
Yeah, true. Very true. Very, very, very true. All right, let's walk us through practice number 5.
Yeah, practice number 5. So, we've been sort of evolving. We've been on this sort of resilience evolution. And so now practice number 5 is the practice of possibility. And this is the idea that anytime the 3 C's, challenge, change, and complexity, show up in our lives, that inherent within that is this sort of dichotomy of risk and opportunity, right? And so in order to harness these moments of challenge and to truly create a new possibility for ourselves and for our lives and for our communities and our families, there's this sort of existence of an opportunity, and there's also risk associated with that. And to be able to balance the two of those, so we're not over-indexing, on kind of being paralyzed by the emergence of risk in this moment, and also not over-indexing on like the excitement of the opportunity without realizing, what the potential drawbacks and pitfalls are. So possibility is very much about not getting mired in perfection, which I think we've kind of been talking about up to this moment, focusing instead on progress, and then how we go about balancing sort of the profile of the inherent risk and opportunity anytime challenge emerges in our lives.
Awesome. Makes so much sense. I said this earlier, probably the best conversation I've had recently or ever around what is resilience and how do we get there. And I mean that, because it's such an important human skill or development that we need to go through. The world needs stronger human beings. We're leaders, we're impactors, we're part of a community, we're parents, we're spouses, we're role models. And, I talk a lot about this is we all have a ripple effect, right? And your ripple effect could be positive or negative, right? And it's it's the fact that you recognize that, we impact people. And sometimes we impact people without even knowing it, right? People watch us. I love what you were describing, your story about when your team came in and said, hey, we made a mistake. You went, whoa, hold on a second, right? Let's break this down. Not a mistake, learning experience, and we're going to develop and we're going to grow from that. That's what I talk about, role modeling. Otherwise, we leave people in these same positions, and that's just reinforcing that same perception. And part of the exercise, I think, in a lot of these things is challenging our perceptions, which is very difficult to do because it's unconscious and it's sometimes based on our values, our experiences, and, it's hard to explain. But the more we start to challenge some of those perceptions, the more we can start to move through these practices. Vulnerability, productive perseverance, intelligent goals. I love the way you define that as well. Connection, and not just with other, but with ourself, right? That self-esteem versus that self-image, the projection I put out to the world versus what am I really, really feeling myself. Gratiosity, I pronounce that correctly, right? Generosity and gratefulness combined together. Love that. Totally TM that. That's a great word. And possibility, focusing on that horizon and blue sky thinking and visualizing and, being optimistic and thinking about how can we. In fact, there's a lot of psychology around this, which you'll appreciate the difference between the why and the what and the how question. So the why question is very self-destructive, right? Which is, why does this keep happening to me? Because I'm a loser, I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not smart enough, I don't have enough education. Why? And it just leads us down the rabbit hole versus possibility, which is, what do I want to do and how do I want to get there? And if we can start to change these why questions into what and how questions, we're starting to give ourselves a lot more oomph, we'll call it fuel, behind that possibility. Awesome. All right. Your book is coming out very soon, April 18th, I think I heard you say, which is the official drop date. Can people pre-order the book now?
Yeah, people can pre-order the book now. In fact, please pre-order the book now. I would be delighted and honored if you would. I'm that author who always has a copy of her book within, arm's length, right? So here it is right here for those of you on video, the 5 practices of highly resilient people. Why some flourish and others fold. And what feels really important right now is I've seen how these 5 practices have served as a blueprint for how we face challenge and how it has fundamentally shifted the way people think, the way people feel, the way that we live our lives. And I feel tremendously grateful to be showing up in this moment of human history and human experience where I think resilient feels as important, at least as it ever has before. And, if I could take my name off this book. And, if somebody said like, hey, we can get this book to 1 million people, but your name's not going to be on it, nobody's going to know that you wrote it, I would be like,
let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's do it tomorrow, because I just believe so much in this work and how I've seen it shift and transform people's lives. Mm-hmm. And so it feels deeply important to me to share this work with the world. And so if it is a call to you, to anyone listening to this episode, I'd be delighted for you to purchase the book. I'm sure the link will be in your show notes, and go to our website, resilience-leadership, and grab it.
We're going to drop all your links in the show as well. One more question, actually, families and kids. I read this earlier, which is one of the very important pieces of being resilient is having a strong family connection and bond at home. Is that something you would agree with? Which is, when it comes down to us as parents and families, we have a massive responsibility right now to recognize that connection and that relationship that we're developing with our family is a massive piece of allowing people to go through some of these practices, like you've described, the 5 practices to become resilient.
Yeah. So in the third section of my book, the first section is kind of the introduction and myths and truths of resilience. The second section is the 5 practices. And in the third section, I actually did specific chapters on areas of experience that people wanted me to really kind of make resilience practical, right? And so one of those chapters is on parenting, right? And how we can not only enhance our own resilience, but through effective parenting, also enhance and kind of transfer to our children effective, resilience and being able to navigate ambiguity. And, what I'd say is there's an awful lot of people who grew up in families maybe where they don't feel connected to their parents, or parents don't feel connected, with children. And so what I wouldn't want to say is, absent a deep family connection, you cannot be resilient, right? Or you can't cultivate resilience, but instead to say, I think what the research shows is having a strong connection and bond, right, with at least one other person. That is this, Greg, right? It's a tremendous differentiator, right, in our ability to be able to effectively move through the world and to receive, support and help, like we talked about earlier. So as parents, do we have a tremendously important opportunity to be close with our children and to help cultivate resilience for them? Absolutely. And if you did not get that as a child, what I like to say is, just as we said, hey, it's never too late. Like, don't worry if you didn't have great parental role models, because the one thing that we can always go back to is to be the big person now that we would have wanted to have when we were a little person, right? So anytime I get into a moment with my children where I'm like, I don't know what to do, I've never seen this before, I think, okay, well, what would I have wanted to have in this moment? How would I have wanted to have a parent show up? And we can use that as a guidepost, even if we didn't have, strong role models as parents. And if we didn't get that from our parents, I think we can still cultivate those close connections and familial ties, with people who may not be part of our gene pool.
Right. We could break the cycle. We could do it different. Cool. If people wanted to get in touch with you around working with you, learning more about some of your services, where can they find you? Let's drop your social handles, your website, drop it all.
Beautiful. Yes, all in the show notes. A great place to find me is either on LinkedIn using my name, Dr. Taryn Marie Stejskal, or on Instagram at Dr. Taryn Marie. And the website is also a wonderful resource and way for us to get connected. You can certainly message me on our social platforms. There's also a place on our website, resilience with a C-leadership.com, where you can send us a note, and that'll go directly to my team and I'll be able to see your inquiry about working together, questions that you have on this work, where you can get more resources. So we'd be just delighted to hear from you.
Amazing. Amazing. To the audience, don't forget to check out Dr. Taryn Marie Stejskal. We're going to have all those links and handles in the show notes. Pick up a copy of the book, either now as a pre-order, or if you haven't pre-ordered it, it drops April 18th, which is around the corner. Super, super, super exciting. Thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it. You're an absolute legend. What you shared with us today was so insightful and I think super, super practical as well. Awesome. The world needs more of you.
Thank you so much, Greg. Well, I am just so honored to have been on your show, to have spent this time together. And thank you for having me and for sharing me with your listeners and to trust me to be part of your community. It's a tremendous honor to be here.
Amazing. Well, we want to surround ourselves with better humans, and you're the definition of it. So thank you for sharing today. To the audience, if you like today's episode, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share, and we will see you next time.